about the stories of our children getting opportunity to go to college and about mamas and daddies putting nickels and dimes and quarters together to pay tuition. It's about our stories. It's about the hardships and the pain and the suffering. It's about the protests and the marching. It's about the standing. It's about the legislation. It's about all of that. It's our story.
Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor, is a poignant, true life story that chronicles the remarkable journey of W. Franklyn Richardson, from humble and challenging beginnings to honored positions of power and global influence. Witness to Grace gives an intimate portrayal of the rise of one of the most respected religious and civil rights leaders of our time.
That this is what is so marvelous about the grace of God, is that in the looking back over my shoulder, in faith, you look forward, but you can't see grace looking forward. You can only see grace looking back over your shoulder and seeing where you've been. It's like the rear view mirror. You can only see where you've been through looking in the rear view mirror if you're going forward. And when you get to the place you can look back and you see where you are and you see what you had to come through and you see that God's fingerprint is all over what happened to you, to shape you, to get you where you are. And you couldn't have gotten where you are if you had not come from where you were. And if you look back over the road, you see, man, I thought I was driving, but God was driving. God was preparing me for the thing he knew he had for me up the road. And I needed all that pain to get me to where I could be used by him in the future.
Welcome back. I'm Tamika Mallory, and I am sitting with my pastor, the Reverend Dr. W. Franklyn Richardson, talking about his new book, Witness to Grace. This is part 2 of our conversation, and we've been covering so many issues today, Doc. We've talked about politics, we've talked about social justice, we've talked about religion, the Black church. So much has happened in your life. I would hope that particularly younger pastors and younger leaders. This book is not just for pastors.
No.
That they would pick up this book and read about your life and your experiences so that it can inform the direction forward. What are some of the qualities of a good leader?
Well, I think a good leader is essentially first a prepared person. Prepared. I think a good leader is one who is authentic, being who they really are. I think a good leader is one who has passion for others, who's not self-centered, but who does not do everything for him or herself, but for the people he seeks or she seeks to lead. I think a good leader is one who has a heart and who has a loving way. A good leader. A good leader is one who does not simply serve for the moment, but serves for the long run. Who seeks to get the future, whose impact seeks to be ahead in the future, even beyond his or her years.
Wow. A good leader. Those are things that you embody, but sometimes, again, trying to lead our own people. I mean, you have first of all, everything is political.
Yes.
How you run your house, the grocery store is political. Everything is political. And I guess you have to be able to navigate, especially with all the personalities within church, with everything that you do. There's so many personalities. And you're a good people person. You think that you have to be a good people person to be a good pastor?
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I really do.
There's some people who are not.
But there's some pastors who are not good people persons, and they succeed to a degree. But I think one of the things that happens is, for me, is I got started early. I was a pastor at 19.
Okay.
And so that helped me to get...
You talk about that in the book.
Yeah.
Right.
I was pastor at 19, and so I began to grow and exposed to things and learn people.
And the church at the time was 100 years old.
Yes.
While you were the pastor at 19.
At 19.
So there was some folks in the church.
Oh, God. I had one deacon told me, you could never be my pastor.
Oh, Lord.
Because you two, I got children older than you.
We shall not be moved. Wow.
I'll tell you, but tell you the truth, all of those things have helped me to be the pastor I am today. Because I can see, fortunately, I'm probably at the end of my journey, but fortunately, I can see a problem 3 weeks ahead, or 3 years ahead. I can see a person in the pew. I said, that's going to be a problem. Now let's prepare to how we.
They haven't even said anything.
No, they ain't said
nothing.
I know. They said something. They did something that I've been. The other thing is when you pastor the church, you never meet nobody that you have never met before.
Wow, it's the same
people,
type of people.
Whether they're on the board of the college, whether they're in the network in the chapters, whether in the conference or that. I done met you before. You got a different name. I know you.
You know the personality traits.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue to this point. At Grace, we are multi-dimensional, if you will, and multi-generational.
Yes.
And that's not always the case in churches. I only know, Black churches because that's really, what I frequent. But I've been to many where it's either very old or very, very young. And I'm not comfortable in either space. But at Grace, I find a little bit of everything. I can talk to my elders, be around very young kids, and also work with people who are my immediate peers. That must take a lot of work for you to be able to do it. And the reason why the previous conversation is so important here is because you've had to see the behavior of even some of the deacons and the elder leaders of the church and say, cut that out, because you're going to turn away some of the younger folks.
You have to be intentional to create a diverse congregation. It doesn't automatically happen. I remember some years ago, I visited a friend of mine preaching in Philadelphia. His church was full. And I preached for him, and I'm from Philadelphia. And a lot of my friends were at the church that day. And I looked around, and I was the youngest person in the church. I was about 50 then. and I said, oh my God. But the church was full. If you didn't pay attention, you'd miss it. Everybody there was over 50. Me and my friends were the youth.
Wow.
At 50 years old.
And it was full.
Full.
Wow.
And so, but it was full, but it had no future. And so it spoke to me. I left that service, got back to Grace, and I declared to the congregation that we're going to be intentional about going and getting young people to take leadership. People will not join what they cannot see, if they cannot see themselves. So we went intentionally. I put young people on the deacons ministry. I put very young people on trustees. I created a whole young adult department. And the young adult choir and gave them access and encouraged them. And that today is responsible for the diversity that we have at Grace. And then we also, the other thing is important. We are a church that affirms women. So when you take and undertreat or mistreat 50% of your population, where's your growth gonna come from? A young girl who comes to Grace can see herself in the pulpit.
That's right.
Or in the deacon's ministry. And that's an affirmation. People want to be affirmed. And so we have to be a church that's open. One of the great challenges, and one of the things I've been doing, one of the things that's happened in my life is this kind of evolving into who I am. Today, we find ourselves being a church of diversity, welcoming all people, affirming people. Right. And that's how you get diversity, and that's how you get life. And those young people, they bring energy. They bring ideas. Right. They bring somebody who knows how to work them computers and them devices.
And all the devices. And the church is also affirming to the LGBTQIA community.
That's exactly right.
Which is so important. And I've heard you from the pulpit say, not here.
That's right.
We let everyone in.
That's right. We affirm. We affirm. We believe, or I believe, that love is love. I believe that. I guess I believe that because close to my growing up, I don't know if I mentioned it in the book, my brother was gay.
Oh, okay.
And he helped to sensitize me. I resented him being gay when I was coming up. I resented it. because I thought it was a personal attack on me.
On you.
This is my brother. But I learned from him, and we reconciled, and I understand how people are who they are, and they're authentic, and we have to make space for people, and so I don't impose my positions on people, but I do oppose anybody who would try to marginalize somebody or
just because
they're who they love.
And people at Grace are not like, if you come and you're a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, it's not like you're in a committee over there.
Right.
You are a part of the church.
That's exactly
and can operate in all the different areas. There is a statement that I think is pretty bold in the book where you say that racism and sexism are siblings. And I think about Senator Kamala Harris, now VP-elect Harris. Do you think she can actually break that final ceiling and become president?
Well, I guess I've been there before. When Barack Obama was running for president, I could not believe he could become president. I thought that the America I knew could never elect a black man president, and I was proven wrong. Given that, I believe Kamala can become president of the United States. But it's going to be determined by how well she performs, how well she strategizes, and then it's going to be determined by some things she has nothing to do with.
That's that Grace again.
Yeah, well, Grace, as it was with Barack Obama. Some of the things that made him president, he had nothing to do with. The collapsing economy of John Kane's vice presidential choice, all of those things were givens that helped them. And she will need those things, but she will also need to be the best vice president that she can be, so that her performance as vice president will commend her as a nominee for president.
It will precede her.
Yes, indeed. It will be her. It'll be the resume by which she is thought of as for a presidential candidate.
Yeah.
And I think it's in all of our minds. Will she be president? Is she going to be president? And I think we're in this in our minds because, well, Joe is older, and the vice presidents often have opportunity, and it's going to be. Every time she speaks, people will be thinking about that. Yeah,
I mean, Reverend, we pulled Joe Biden across the finish line. We dusted the brother off and brought him with us across the finish line. I think most people voted for Senator Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
They voted with belief and hope.
Well, most African Americans.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole population.
Yeah. Well, I was talking about us. I'm always talking about black folks.
Yeah. But we voted hopefully. There are some people who are not black who didn't vote for Joe Biden because of Kamala Harris.
Right.
He would have got more votes if he didn't from the white community. He wouldn't have got as many from us, but he would have got more votes from the white community if she were not a black vice presidential candidate. Well,
here's the curveball with that. The percentage of black men who voted for Donald Trump went up. And the percentage of black women, however, the number for black women is very, very small. But 17 to 18% of black men who voted in the election voted for Donald Trump. And I wonder how much of that can be attributed to the idea that some of our men still have not confronted patriarchy and decided that it's okay to support women.
Yeah, I think that's an element of that available. But I rather think that part of that had to do with Joe Biden's position on the prison system and his pushing forward that. Part of it had to do with Kamala's being a prosecutor. Part of that had to do with not being available to African American men. So I think, I think it's a combination of that. I don't think there's one thing that makes the 18% come down. I'm very disappointed by that number.
Of course.
I'm very frustrated. How could you do it? How could you do us like that?
Right.
When we know that this gentleman was perpetuating racism at the highest form.
That's right.
And misogyny and all of the things that we're supposed to be against in America.
Yeah.
So I cannot justify black men who didn't vote for Joe Biden. I really hope that it's not because a black woman was running for vice president, but I know there's something like that.
Yeah. You're being kind, Doc. You're being kind. I had the conversations on the ground. I had many black men calling me out of my name for even asking them to vote, period, and certainly don't bring up Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. There's a lot of vitriol out there for black women. And I don't know exactly how we solve that issue, that even in our communities, because there are things which I appreciate about Witness to Grace, is that we got to deal with some internal stuff, some deep things. In the black church, I've been to many churches where there are no women in the pulpit at all. In fact, I decided that when I was, called and asked to present at different services, different things people book me for, that they can't sit me on the floor in the congregation and then have me to speak at the desk. At the little, is that what it's called?
Yeah,
the little
podium.
The podium. I don't do that.
That's right.
If you can't allow me to come into the pulpit and speak from there, then I won't show up.
Right.
What do we have to do to break down that mentality?
Well, you caused me to revisit this because I remember talking to preachers in Detroit, for a matter of fact, when Hillary Clinton was running for president. And they straight up told me that the Bible says a woman's place is not in the leadership.
It's in the book.
There's a book. So I hear you. I'm not putting it down. It pains me. It's hard for me to identify with that spirit because for me, as I said in the book, that how do you be opposed to racism and affirm sexism? How do you justify that? How do you make that separation? It's the same identical emotion. Sexism and racism are the same, but they do it.
They do it every day.
They do it. And I guess the best thing I say is if women can be more empowered, they have, if it's a high consciousness of women who are participating in the process, and some men who are sensitive, we can succeed in spite of those who have the mentality of oppression of women. So it's going to have to be a coalition around them.
Right.
We got to leave them standing by themselves.
Right, and some of them will eventually come along.
They'll come along because they have to come along.
Right. I think when you think about the number of black women who vote together and, vote for the Democratic Party, which is a different conversation another day about how we continue to pour our support into a party that still does not properly represent our people. Yes. And that is real work that we have to get to and talk about. But black women vote on behalf of the community. We vote with everybody in mind. We even vote for white women and their husbands and everything. We vote for every nationality. The entire America is on our backs. But the conversations that I had with many black men was about economics. It was about my tax bracket, the tax codes, different things. And a lot of times I didn't hear a consideration for the fact that reproductive rights was on the ballot. That if we allow Donald Trump to get elected again, your wife would no longer have control over her body. And it's and just in line with what you're saying about how you can be against racism and for sexism, what do you tell your daughter?
That's right.
How do you tell your daughter that you're not willing to see her rise to her greatest potential? It's a challenge that we certainly have to reckon with. As a mother of a black son, I know how important it is that he keep his mother and other women in mind as he makes decisions.
Yes. It's about the stories of our children getting opportunity to go to college, and about mamas and daddies putting nickels and dimes and quarters together to pay tuition. It's about our stories. It's about the hardships and the pain and the suffering. It's about the protests and the marching. It's about the standing. It's about the legislation. It's about all of that. It's our story.
Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor, is a poignant, true life story that chronicles the remarkable journey of W. Franklyn Richardson, from humble and challenging beginnings to honored positions of power and global influence. Witness to Grace gives an intimate portrayal of the rise of one of the most respected religious and civil rights leaders of our time.
You just said something that struck me. No, this is not about pastors. And it's not even about preachers. It's about people who are seeking to make against the odds. It's about people who are trying to overcome. It's about people finding their key, finding where they stand. Where this book is about people finding affirmation, and it's for all people. In this Black Lives Matter moment, this is a Black life that matters. And that is what I want the sons and daughters who are coming up to read about, who happen to be a preacher.
Who happen to be a preacher, but a Black life that matters. Wow, y'all heard it. You gotta get this book. I mean, it's all in there. Witness to Grace. Doc, how do you come up with these great preaching moments every single Sunday? And you know, grace is tough, because we want to hear some good stuff every week. We send you home for a whole week. We want you to come with a hoop and a moment every week. How do you do that? It's got to be hard.
Well, first of all, I don't go home. My sermons come off the road, come off of engagement, come off of what's happening in the lives of people. And I'm always trying to take what's going on in the lives of people and reflect it in the biblical text so that the text speaks to what we are going through. I've preached these last several months. I'm caught up in what people are experiencing in the pandemic, what they're going through, what it means to die alone, what it means to be sick, what it means to lose your taste, your smell, your ability to walk, to lose your children, to lose your parents. I'm in that space where what's happening to people, the tension between that, I can't breathe, the Black Lives Matter themes, I can't breathe, get your knee off my neck. All of these things provide relevance for the preaching moment. And that's what people come to church for. They don't come to church for you to read them the Sunday school lesson, to read the Bible. Tell me how that Bible makes a difference in my life, how that Bible makes a difference in my experience, how that Bible leads me to a relationship with God that will fuel me for the challenges I got to face in my life.
Is the church still relevant?
Oh, yes, the church is relevant. It's flawed because it's made up of human beings, broken people in the pulpit, broken people in the pew. It is a lot of brokenness in the church. But what makes it relevant is its message, is its malleable. It's not static. Some places it may be irrelevant, but it's never static. And it's changes. It may not change as fast as some others, but it's clearly relevant because it preserves values that are perpetual. And it speaks to something higher than ourselves, and it pushes us to understand ourselves in the light of the context of what's going on in the world. No, the church is relevant. The Black church is relevant because it still has the capacity to mobilize people. It's the place where, it's still to a large degree, the place where Black people have private study, private moment. where the culture gets preserved. The culture gets preserved. It's where the music is out there in the hip hop now and all over, but the culture, the music got preserved in the church. The rhythms, the beats, the messages, the sense of freedom, all of that emerged from the church. And the church continues to perpetuate that. And
a place for private meeting.
Yes.
A place, in the Black church, when I think about it, it's like the only place in some communities that have it together in terms of administrative duties and an operating function every day.
Yes. It's still the place for affirmation. There's no place in the culture where people get affirmed as blacks like they do in the church. That's where we get our somebodiness. Because we go to church. The church gives us somebodiness. We're children of God. We have value. In spite of a culture that says we're lacking value. Shattered window panes of the lives of men and women who have lost their way and who come with questions. How am I going to make it? What does this mean? Where is hope? Where is God? And so the church has relevance because it struggles with those questions. Nobody else in the society is struggling with that question about where is God or what this means. That's turf that's preserved for the church.
That's a conversation for the church.
And as long as people are hurting, as long as people are broken, the church will be irrelevant. And I don't suspect that people are going to stop being broken and hurt for a long time.
And you always say praise Him in all the different moments, the good ones and the bad ones. I remember one time I called you and I said, why me? And you said, why not you? You had all these good things to happen. Why would you think that trouble wouldn't come? And the church definitely was a place where I was able to bring broken pieces so that I could be put back together.
Go back forward. go forward and get broke again.
Go forward and get broke again. You mentioned the culture, and we're coming to the end of this conversation that has just been so amazing. Being in conversation with you, I know so much of the story, but it sounds good with the backdrop of this great book.
Thank you.
You say the culture. Doing it for the culture. That's a thing that young folks say. I don't know if you know about things that young people say, but you got grandchildren that say everything.
Everything.
Doing it for the culture. However, we know that Christ is lived in culture, but for some, they're not 100% sure that you can be in the culture and of Christ at the same time. Are those things aligned?
Well, I think Christ and culture are components of the expressions of faith. The culture is the place whereby we communicate values and we communicate style and customs. And Christ comes to call us to those styles and customs to a higher level, pushes us to a higher level. Christ must show up in culture. If Christ does not show up in culture, where was Christ to show up? Christ showed up historically. The historical Jesus was in culture, in a culture that was oppressive and a culture that ultimately crucified him and rejected him and denied him. So Christ is born in culture. And Christ continued, and the church, if it is of Christ, has to continue in the participation of transforming culture to God's ultimate purpose.
Being nice to people.
Yes.
Treating people good, raising your children a certain way.
Fairness. Equality, justice.
Those are powerful words. So, as we've talked about so many times, you've overcome many obstacles in your life. You've been through a lot. And you still maintain hope. You talk about faith. You have such a sense of gratitude. And there is this portion of the book that just struck me, really struck me, Doc, where you say, how do I say thanks? And it's so Franklyn Richardson-like. How do I say thanks? Let me read this passage. How do you say thanks for all the multiple influences that have impacted your life for good? For the people institutions, and experiences that have shaped your perspective and inspired your aspirations. For me, there are a litany of deserving entities, but here I will showcase 2 angels of grace. I suppose it would be helpful to explain why I must say thanks. It begins with the fact that I had nothing to give when I first encountered Virginia Union University. I was only in a posture to receive. When Virginia Union finished pouring into me, my situation completely changed. I could then pour into it. My gratitude is born of an awareness of the gifts of opportunity Virginia Union gave to me. After the gift of a college education given me by this institution, I found my life not only empowered by the completion of that educational opportunity, but also by my association with the institution. I was given considerations simply because I was a student at Virginia Union. It started when I was a freshman. Assisted by the faculty, I was placed in remediation to overcome my reading deficiencies, which you've talked about today. The fact that I received a call at the undergraduate school to preach at my first pastorate is a consideration granted to me because I was a student, not a graduate. Who knows how differently my future would have been altered if it were not for the opportunities extended to me by Virginia Union. My association with the union is foundational in my life and the achievements I have accomplished. I'm picking up a little bit later in that chapter. No reflection of grace extended to me would be adequate without acknowledging the role of the church in my life. The Black church has been in many ways the custodian of Black culture, the place which sustained us spiritually and nursed hope in our darkest days. It was a place of affirmation when the white majority demeaned us at every point, sabotaging our self-esteem. We could go to church and find self-confidence and dignity. I know that my healthy self-esteem, you got a big one, Doc. You got a big one. I'm just saying. I love it. You walk in a room, it lights up. Everybody knows W. Franklyn Richardson is here. I know that my healthy self-esteem is due in large part to my growing up under the influence of the church. Being exposed to the communal environment of the church for me was therapeutic. The sermons were affirming. Growing up in the youth activities gave me the opportunity to develop resources within myself long before being afforded the opportunity to attend Virginia Union. My church experience deposited in me aspiration. It reinforced in me the notion that I could achieve. Moreover, the church gave me values and a sense of right and wrong. It taught me to value truth and the sacredness of human life. It developed in me a moral compass. We didn't get a chance to talk about the many people you've buried and how much that must weigh on a pastor to have to constantly go before families. It's gotta be hard, Doc, that you get those calls and you gotta show up. And I've watched you bury friends. Where you say, I should be sitting out there with you, but everybody wants you to preach that last sermon over their lives. That must be an honor.
It's an honor and a burden. It's an honor and a burden. Because one of the things you have to guard against is over-internalizing the moment. The maturity for the pastor is to not become, while you want to be where the people are, you've got to be able to hold back enough in order to provide value to the meaning, to the moment. You cannot become the one needing the grief. You've got to become the one who's ministering to the grief. And that becomes the thing that's pressing on you. And now when you leave the service, you may go and pout and cry and grieve like everybody else. But you got to stand up because people need you to stand up. And God has called you to stand up. And you got to stand up. And when you've been doing it a long time, it doesn't get any easier to walk into a funeral. But it's what you've been called to do.
And you were even Grateful for that.
Yes. It's a gift of grace to be able to be a vessel of healing to people who are hurting. What more grace is that? Who deserves that?
Yeah.
Who deserves the privilege to be God's vessel of healing and hope in the midst of people's despair?
Now, you've had some great people. I mean, Heavy D.
Yeah.
Is one of the individuals that you held a great service here for him while a lot of people were hurting in this community. Obviously, you've had a lot of people of great influence come through here, especially at funeral services where you see everyone, P. Diddy, Puff, as we call him. Yeah.
It's just, it's a blessing. It's a gift.
Yeah, you find a blessing in everything. So we started at Mad at God.
Yeah.
And thinking about this pandemic and what people are going through, we're ending with an epilogue that you also kind of talk about what it must feel like. Like, people are probably still mad at God.
Yes.
But yet something else moves you. Mm-hmm. Talk about the epilogue as we close. And then give us your final words. Why should people invest in this book, Witness to Grace?
Well, I find myself doing the epilogue as a response to the fact that my book's publication and release was held up by the pandemic. And while it was held up, I began to reflect on where is the grace of God in the midst of the pandemic? I asked myself that question. Where is the grace of God in the midst of this pandemic? And to my delight, I've been able to infer God's grace even in the midst of the pandemic. Because there is a sense in which the pandemic is the resetting and refocusing of the whole creation. The fake walls of nationalism come tumbling down, of classism, of race. All of them come tumbling down in the pandemic. The pandemic challenges the imbalanced distribution of wealth and the lack of resources. It makes us see ourselves as the pandemic made it possible for us to see George Floyd.
That's right.
We never would have saw him if it wasn't for the pandemic.
Right.
We've been busy watching television and doing all the things we were doing. But we were sitting at the television and we had to see it over and over again. The pandemic made us pay attention. The pandemic was a prelude to a new resurgence of Black Lives Matter and the concerns of Black people. So there are ways in which the pandemic helped us to see how vulnerable all of us are. Some of us were arrogantly asserting like we're gonna be here forever. But we were confronted with our own vulnerability because of the pandemic. And I think that in the long run, we will see that this episode that we are going through and have gone through is a function of God's grace. That is it possible that God was saving us by this pandemic from our own self-destruction in the global village, not just America, but the global village? That is it possible that the corruption that existed in us, the unfairly distributed wealth, the contamination, the destruction of the climate was so functional that it was put in the beginning of creation a default, that when we became so corrupt, God would have this emerge to cause us to see ourselves as we are? So those are the questions that I had a chance to add in the context of writing this book, the questions of the pandemic.
Still giving people an ability to see, even in the midst of struggle, what we're supposed to get from it. And isn't that the story of Black people?
Yes.
Every time there's trauma, we evolve.
That's right.
We go to the next level.
That's right.
So, Witness to Grace.
Well, I want to encourage people to read it because it is an honest testimony. And because I believe that it's not just my story, but it's all of our stories.
Yeah.
That if you can look hard enough, you can see the grace of God functioning in your life. And when you see it, you can be a witness to God's grace. I hope the book will usher us all to a clearer focus on looking over our shoulders and seeing the grace of God.
Dr. W. Franklyn Richardson, my pastor, Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor. Wow. Thank you so much for having me, Doc. Incredible conversation.
Thank you. I've been blessed by it.
Yeah. And thank you all so much for joining us and being with us for this powerful, powerful discussion. Get the book, Witness to Grace.
It's about the stories of our children getting opportunity to go to college, and about mamas and daddies putting nickels and dimes and quarters together to pay tuition. It's about our stories. It's about the hardships and the pain and the suffering. It's about the protests and the marching. It's about the standing. It's about the legislation. It's about all of that. It's our story.
Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor, is a poignant, true life story that chronicles the remarkable journey of W. Franklyn Richardson, from humble and challenging beginnings to honored positions of power and global influence. Witness to Grace gives an intimate portrayal of the rise of one of the most respected religious and civil rights leaders of our time.